Good morning. Today I want to discuss two important points. One is the cholesterol hypothesis wrong? And the other one, what about the ketogenic diets? Are they really healthy? I just read this important paper published in the European Heart Journal that I think makes an important point that people should be aware of. So if you are Googling, is the cholesterol hypothesis wrong? You're going to find a lot of articles. You see almost 10 million articles with a lot of statements, mostly not supported. But in summary, some people are arguing that the classical cholesterol hypothesis that lowering cholesterol levels results in a lower risk of cardiovascular disease is wrong, or at least simplistic, because the range of results from cholesterol lowering trials is inconsistent. This is not true. And I'm going to show you in a second that it's not true. And it's driven lately by the high fat, high protein, ketogenic diets supporters of beneficial effects of ketogenic diets or high protein diets. As I said, as this beautiful paper just published in European Heart Journal shows, basically, in this paper, this is a randomized clinical trial where they randomized the 4-year trial, where they randomized almost 28,000 patients with stable coronary heart disease that were already taking statins. So these drugs to lower cholesterol that everybody knows, they were randomized to placebo or evolocumab. Evolocumab is an inhibitor of the PCSK9 protein that basically is altering the breakdown of the LDL receptor in the liver, and therefore is lowering LDL cholesterol, so cholesterol big ways. So the question is, if you lower LDL cholesterol by this PCSK9 inhibitor on top of statins, what happens to cardiovascular disease across many territories? Indeed, in this study, they look at the acute coronary events, including coronary heart disease, death, myocardial infarction, or urgent coronary revascularization. Then they look at the cerebrovascular bed and events with ischemic stroke, TIA, or urgent cerebral revascularization. And finally, the peripheral vascular with acute limb ischemia, major amputation, or urgent peripheral revascularization. So again, the results are striking and clear to everybody. Okay, look here. So basically, there was a 20% reduction in only 2.2 years of follow-up, median follow-up. Basically, there was a 20% reduction in first events and a 24% reduction in total events, with a 70% reduction in acute coronary events, a 23% reduction in acute cerebrovascular events, and a 42% reduction in acute peripheral vascular events. Okay, so there is no doubt, okay, no doubt that lowering cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, has a role in the pathogenesis of multiple atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, not only the heart, but the brain and the peripheral vascular beds that are impacted big ways. Okay, so there is no inconsistencies. The data are clear. and they are in line with all the studies done with statins, primary and secondary prevention. As you can see here, the lower the LDL cholesterol, the lower the coronary heart disease events. In these meta-analysis of 22 statin trials involved with 134,000 participants, each reduction of 40 milligram deciliter of LDL cholesterol was associated with a reduction of by 20% in cardiovascular events, even in people who were considered to be at low risk. And based on several meta-analyses, the event rate, so the risk of developing a coronary heart disease event, approaches zero when LDL cholesterol is about 60 milligram deciliter. It is almost half of what is the value in most people in Western countries, because, as we will see in a second, people in Western countries, they're eating huge amount of animal fat, and plus they are sedentary and they are overeating calories and many other unhealthy foods that are promoting cardiovascular disease. Of course, you know, as I always said, LDL cholesterol is not the only cardiovascular risk factor. There are many other ones, the major ones like hypertension, diabetes, inflammation, smoking, obesity, and then there are several others. But there is no doubt and no inconsistency regarding the effects of lowering LDL cholesterol in relation to the reduction of, as we see in this paper again, you know, with the PCSK inhibitor in multiple territories. Okay, now you can, and there is no doubt that lifestyle is very important in mediating your cholesterol levels. As you can see here, these are a figure that I took from this beautiful review article in Cell by Goldstein and Brown, who won the Nobel Prize for cholesterol metabolism. And you can see the median cholesterol level in Asia, at least in the past, was around 150. And in North America and Europe is around 220. And that's why basically in Asia, before the change in lifestyle due to the Americanization of the lifestyle and diet, it was basically, atherosclerosis was basically an orphan disease. It was unknown, mostly unknown. Now, you may argue that this is genetic, you know, so that this difference, 150 versus 220, is just due to bad genes, like many people think. This is not true, because data from the Monica cardiovascular studies clearly show that basically in 1984 in China, the average total cholesterol was 160. That is very similar to 150 that I before showed. And in only basically 15 years, it climbed in both men and women to almost 200, 193 on average. So this is not due to genes. Genes don't change in 15 years. This is due to major change in diet and lifestyle that occurred in many Asian countries, okay? So no excuses. Cholesterol, like every disease, has a genetic component, but the interaction with the environment has huge effects. Now, I think, you know, that in part, this idea that cholesterol and animal fat is not bad for cardiovascular disease comes from this new fad that is the ketogenic. You know, a few years ago, it was the high protein, low carb diet, with Dr. Atkins and the South Beach diet and many, the paleo, and more recently, the new fad is about ketogenic diet. Now, let me say that the ketogenic diet works because people on a ketogenic diet, typically they lose weight. So they are calorie restricted. And when you are calorie restricted, as I'll show you in a second, you have major improvements, at least transiently, to several risk factors, cardiometabolic risk factors. Now, in this study published in JAMA on basically 141 kids that were randomized to a controlled diet or a ketogenic diet for 6 months without weight loss, basically, as you can see here in this study, they were randomized to a 4-to-1, so 4 fat, the ratio was for fat 4-to-1, and after diet initiation, the calories and ratio were adjusted to maintain ideal body weight for height and maximal urinary ketosis. Okay, and as you can see here, cholesterol in these children, the total cholesterol went from 174 to 232 in only 6 months. There was an increase of 58 milligram deciliter of total cholesterol. LDL cholesterol jumped from 99 to 148, very dangerous level, 50 units of increase. HDL cholesterol dropped highly significant, 7 units, 7 milligram deciliter, and VLDL cholesterol increased from 17 to 25, non-HDL cholesterol skyrocketed from 118 to 181, and even triglyceride went up from 96 to 154. So without weight loss, or after basically you obtain your weight loss, a high fat ketogenic diet has a tremendous deleterious effect on a lipid profile, increasing again, the risk of having multiple coronary disease. Again, let me show here again. Lowering cholesterol is not lowering the risk of acute coronary events, but also cerebrovascular events and acute peripheral vascular events. I don't have time to go into the details of the mechanisms, but these are the data. So you can make up your mind and decide what you want to do. And again, see here how many people for this is for total cholesterol of these kids, baseline and 6 months on a ketogenic diet, acceptable, less than 170, dropped by a big, more than half. Borderline high also dropped, and high jumped very high. So very, very bad results. Now, it's interesting that, as I said, is basically the negative energy balance that changes cholesterol big way. So in this randomized clinical trial we did at Washington University, we compare the effects of weight loss induced by calorie restriction or endurance exercise or control. CR was a 25% restriction in calories. We achieved a 10% weight loss. Exercise was achieved by asking our participants to exercise. So these people, they exercise on average 1 hour per day, 6 days a week at 72% of max heart rate. And we achieved basically an 8% weight loss. And these were men and women, 50 to 60 years old, BMI between 25 and 30, so overweight. So the results in terms of cholesterol is that both exercise and CR lower total cholesterol, but again, there was a 20 milligram deciliter, 17 and 19, highly significant reduction in LDL cholesterol. In the control group, instead of, there was a non-significant increase in cholesterol from 128 to 135. Sort of, both in the CR, again, in exercise, 122, 105, 131, or 111. And HDL cholesterol, the good cholesterol, increased significantly with the exercise from 54 to 60, and in the CR, there was a trend, but it was not significant from 56 to 59.4, okay? So both exercise and calorie restriction, so an negative energy balance is reducing LDL cholesterol in this randomized clinical trial we published in the American Journal of Physiology in 2007. And then Dennis Villarreal in a group of obese patients is also shows that, weight loss, around 6-8% weight loss results in a significant reduction, as you can see here, in total cholesterol, both the CR, minus 15 milligram deciliter, and the exercise, minus 14. And when you combine exercise with calorie restriction, you have a minus 22 milligram deciliter reduction in total cholesterol, okay? Now, LDL cholesterol is similar, minus 10, minus 12, and minus 14. Okay. And these are results of a observational cross-sectional study. Long-term, these people have been doing calorie restriction for an average of 15 years and exercise for an average of 12 years. And as you can see, compared to the control, this average total cholesterol, 202 milligram deciliter, both the exercise and CR, they have very low total cholesterol, 162, 166, LDL cholesterol, 88 and 92, with very high HDL cholesterol, 63 and 61. So basically, with a very fantastic total cholesterol HDL ratio around 2.4, 2.5. Okay, so again, long-term effects of CR with optimal nutrition, exercise, endurance exercise on cholesterol. It's dramatic. It's remarkable. On top of the energy balance, we know that the composition of the diet is also very important, because this is a typical Western diet that is characterizing these average 220 milligram deciliter that I showed you before in the paper published in Cell by Goldstein and Brown. And this is the typical diet of North Americans, North Europeans. Why? Because at least back in the past, it was very difficult to have a variety of fresh vegetables and whole grains and beans and fruits, because that's Germany, that's England, the long winters. And so most of the diet was based on butter. There was no olive oil, so butter, milk, and cream, and eggs, and pork, and beef, and yes, maybe some beans, and some cabbage, and some rye bread. But the basic of the North European and American diets, it's eggs and butter and bacon and sausages and pork and goulash and roast beef and very heavy in milk, very heavy in animal fat. Okay, and we know from multiple studies that there is a linear correlation between the intake of saturated fatty acids, and this is a type of fat that is very rich in all animal products, and LDL cholesterol. So the higher your consumption with food of saturated fatty acids, the higher the LDL cholesterol. Okay, for every 1% increase in calories from saturated fat, there is a raise by 2% of LDL cholesterol. And just to give you an example, butter, cream, and lard are loaded with atherogenic saturated fatty acids. 1 tablespoon of butter is approximately 100 calories and 7 grams of saturated fatty acids. 1 tablespoon of lard, 150 kilocalories, 5 grams of saturated fat. 1 table of olive oil contains 120 calories, but only 1.9 grams of saturated fat. Okay. And what is the recommendation? The American Heart Association recommends aiming for a dietary pattern that achieves 5 to 6% of calories from saturated fat. And if you consume 2,000 calories, that's about 13 grams per day. Okay, so if you have 1 tablespoon of butter, basically you already have almost half, more than half of your daily recommended. Okay, and by the way, the saturated fat is also contained in chocolate cakes because of the butter, other fat they're using. For example, vanilla shake, 16 ounce contains 13 grams of saturated fatty acids. Turkey, no skin, 1 gram. Cheese, 6 grams per ounce. Pepperoni pizza, 1 slice, 5.4 grams. A bacon cheeseburger, 12 grams. So basically, with 1 cheeseburger, you are already basically achieved, your daily saturated fat. So if you start breakfast with bacon and milk and butter, and then you have a cheeseburger, and maybe in the evening you have a pepperoni pizza slice, you already have very high intake of saturated fatty acids. That explain why a lot of people in Western countries, they have high LDL cholesterol, at least in part, because I said, energy consumption, exercise, and calorie restriction has additive effects. And by the way, a lot of people think, that is only butter and cream that contains, and milk that contains saturated fat, but that's not true. Tropical oils are also very rich. For example, coconut oil, it's 92% saturated. So 1 tablespoon of coconut oil is 12 grams of saturated fatty acids. And palm oil, 1 tablespoon, 7 grams. And that's why, for example, in countries like India, where people, they are cooking their food, their dal, their beans, and with a lot of coconut oil or palm oil, they have, higher risk of developing coronary heart disease. And because, again, even if it's not animal fat, apart from ghee, but even coconut oil, palm oils, they are very rich in saturated fatty acids. And by the way, also olive oil, even if much less than butter and cream and palm oil, 1 tablespoon of olive oil contains 120 calories and 2 grams of saturated fat. So, for example, if you are very generous with your dressing of food with olive oil, if you have 5 tablespoons of olive oil per day, this is 700 calories. That is going to bump up your calories quite a bit. And this is like almost 10 grams of saturated fat. This is 73% of your daily RDA if you're consuming 2,000 calories. So you have to be careful also with olive oil, because too much olive oils is increasing your caloric intake, daily caloric intake, and your saturated fat intake. So be careful. And a recently paper published in Science, for example, it shows that a high-fat diet is also inducing colonocyte dysfunction that escalates the microbiota-derived TMO. TMO is a metabolite that is pro-atherogenic independently of the classical cardiometabolic risk factors. And again, a high-fat diet, a ketogenic diet, is causing dysfunction of the gut barrier, the colonocytes, the cells that are the layer of the colon mucosa, that is changing the gut microbiota and increases the production of this pro-atherogenic metabolite called TMO. By the way, I forgot, apart from the coconut oil, the butter, the cream, the milk, and even the olive oil, even if less, very bad fats that are now ubiquitous in many ultra-processed food are trans fatty acids. They're also called partially hydrogenated fatty acids that you can find in baked goods like crackers, cookies, donuts, fried food like French fries, fried chicken, margarines, and many other ones. So look for partially hydrogenated fatty acids because these are worse than butter and cream and lard in terms of increasing your LDL cholesterol, and not only that, also your inflammation. In contrast, a diet, a plant-based diet rich in fibers is protective, because we know that soluble fiber that you can find in oats, barley, wheat, legumes, vegetables, and fruits does reduce LDL cholesterol because it's basically trapping the saturated fatty acids. So if you increase dietary fiber, there is a reduction by 5 to 10% of the LDL cholesterol. Another factor that is mediating this cholesterol lowering effect of whole grains, vegetable, and beans in particular is the composition of, so these foods contain high levels of sterols, plant sterols, that are competing with cholesterol, and they are lowering cholesterol. By consuming plant sterols daily, you can have an extra 10% lowering of cholesterol because of a reduced intestinal absorption of cholesterol, both dietary cholesterol and cholesterol in the bile. Okay, so there are multiple protective effects by consuming a plant-based diet. Indeed, in this randomized clinical trial by Jenkins, published in JAMA in 2003, people with dyslipidemia randomized to a low-fat diet or a low-fat diet and lovastatin, or a dietary portfolio, so a diet rich in plant sterols, soy proteins, viscous fibers, and almonds. As you can see here, the dietary portfolio diet was as powerful as the statins in lowering LDL cholesterol, HDL ratio, and even C-reactive protein. Okay, so multiple data and randomized clinical trial data showing a powerful effect. Now, LDL cholesterol was reduced by more than 30 milligram deciliter, equally to a statin. So you can change your LDL cholesterol, especially if in this study they didn't prescribe exercise or calorie restriction. That was just because of this dietary portfolio rich in plant-based almonds and beans and soy proteins and plant sterols that was able to reduce LDL cholesterol as powerfully as the statin. Okay, so plenty of data. So if you combine with exercise and calorie restriction, you're going to have even more beneficial effects. And again, when you're changing your lifestyle, you're not only impacting cardiovascular disease, but through different mechanisms: inflammation, insulin resistance, diabetes, hyperinsulinemia, fatty liver disease, and gut microbiota, oxidative stress, and blood pressure. You are also preventing many of the most common chronic diseases, including cancer, chronic lung disease, and pancreatitis, gallbladder disease, fatty liver disease, diabetic and atherosclerotic nephropathies, and aging itself. So it's multiple factors, not only cholesterol. Cholesterol is just one of the major players, but it's not the only one. And another lifestyle as well, they have many other beneficial effects. So I hope you like this presentation that is trying to cut the noise, the smoke that is out there with some invested interests about, promoting ketogenic, high animal fat diets. And because the goal shouldn't be to lose some kilos or lower some, the cholesterol, but is to improve your health and longevity, so that, instead of, as you can see here, you can rectangularize your lifespan, so living a very, very, very healthy diet, and then only the last months of your life, you're going to have some problem, instead of, like you can see here, the difference across different races in US in terms of lifespan. The difference is huge. And ideally, if you do everything right, not only you're going to live healthier, but most likely you're going to also live longer, because you're going to act on multiple aging pathways. If you want to know more about these topics, you can follow my YouTube channel, where I have a number of videos divided in sections on exercises, medicine, diet, longevity, cognitive training, mindfulness, environmental health. And I'm also posting interesting articles that I read on the major scientific journals. Normally on Friday and Saturday, I review the literature of the major journals: New England, Lancet, JAMA, Circulation, European Heart Journal, JACC, and Nature Science, Nature Medicine, Cell Metabolism. And if I see some interesting articles, I normally post it on my Twitter or LinkedIn and Facebook account. And then, I have written a number of books that are summarizing my point of view, of course, of what people should do to stay healthy, because that's most important, and live longer and fulfilling lives. Thank you for listening, as always.